There's a mountain in the Himalayas that most people have never heard of. It doesn't have the fame of Everest or the deadly reputation of K2, but those who know it understand something the rest of the world doesn't. This mountain kills quietly. No dramatic headlines, no global media coverage, just climbers who go up and never come back, swallowed by ice and wind and silence. This is Dhaulagiri, the seventh highest peak on Earth. A frozen giant standing at 8,167 meters, towering over the deepest gorge on the planet, hidden in the shadow of its more famous neighbors. For decades, it defeated every expedition that dared to challenge it. And when climbers finally reached its summit in 1960, the mountain didn't surrender. It simply waited. Because Dhaulagiri doesn't care about your experience. It doesn't care how many peaks you've conquered or how many years you've trained. One wrong step, one shift in the weather, one crack in the ice beneath your boots, and you vanish. No rescue, no second chances, just the cold and the wind and the endless white. In October 2024, 5 Russian climbers set out for the summit. They were seasoned mountaineers, veterans of high-altitude expeditions, climbing without supplemental oxygen in the purest style possible. They reached 8,000 meters. They radioed base camp. The summit was within reach, and then silence. Days later, their bodies were found scattered across the ice at 700 meters. They had fallen together, roped as a team, pulled down by a single misstep or a collapsing snow bridge. Dhaulagiri had claimed 5 more lives, but this was nothing new. The mountain has been taking climbers for over 60 years. Avalanches that bury entire teams in seconds. Weather that shifts from calm to catastrophic without warning. Routes that change overnight, turning safe passages into death traps. And a fatality rate that places it among the deadliest peaks in the world. This is Dhaulagiri, the silent killer of the Himalayas. And this is the story of everyone who challenged it. To understand why Dhaulagiri kills so effectively, you first have to understand what it is. And what it is, quite simply, is a monster hiding in plain sight. The mountain rises in north-central Nepal, roughly 80 kilometers northwest of Kathmandu. It dominates the Dhaulagiri Himal range, standing west of the famous Annapurna Massif. But unlike its more celebrated neighbors, Dhaulagiri doesn't share its borders with anyone. It's the highest mountain on Earth contained entirely within a single country. No territorial disputes, no shared glory, just one nation's burden to bear. At its feet lies the Kali Gandaki Gorge, the deepest gorge on the planet. The contrast is almost violent. One of the lowest points in the Himalayas sits directly beside one of the highest, creating a vertical drama that defies comprehension. Stand at the bottom of that gorge and look up, and you'll see Dhaulagiri looming overhead like a frozen wall between earth and sky. For decades, the mountain defeated everyone who tried to climb it. Expedition after expedition turned back, beaten by the weather, the terrain, or simply the mountain's refusal to be conquered. It wasn't until May 13, 1960, that a Swiss-Austrian team led by Max Iselin finally reached the summit. They had done what no one before them could do. But if anyone thought that victory meant the mountain had been tamed, they were wrong. Because here's what separates Dhaulagiri from peaks like Everest. There is no established route, no fixed lines, no infrastructure waiting to guide you to the top. On Everest, thousands of climbers have worn a path into the ice. Sherpas set ropes each season. Camps are stocked with oxygen and supplies. It's still deadly, but it's a known quantity. Dhaulagiri offers none of that. The landscape shifts constantly. Glaciers creep forward and crack apart. Ridgelines crumble without warning. Crevasses open overnight in places that were solid ground the day before. Climbers who summited one year return the next to find their route has simply vanished, replaced by terrain they've never seen. Experience means nothing here. The mountain reinvents itself faster than anyone can learn it. That's why only a handful of climbers attempt Dhaulagiri each year. That's why its fatality rate hovers around 9 to 10%, placing it among the deadliest peaks in the world. And that's why the infamous South Face, a sheer 4,000-meter wall of ice and rock, remains one of the great unclimbed challenges in Himalayan history. No one has ever completed that route. Many have died trying. Dhaulagiri doesn't advertise its danger. It doesn't have Everest's fame or K2's fearsome reputation. It simply exists, silent and indifferent. waiting for the next team to test themselves against its slopes. Some will summit, some will turn back, and some will never leave at all. So, what exactly kills climbers on Dhaulagiri? The answer is almost everything. Start with avalanches. They're the mountain's primary weapon, and they strike without pattern or warning. Dhaulagiri's steep faces and unstable ice formations create a constant lottery of destruction. One moment, the slope above you is silent. The next, thousands of tons of ice and snow are roaring down at speeds that make escape impossible. Climbers have been buried in seconds, their bodies never recovered, swallowed by debris fields so massive that even locating them becomes a years-long effort. There's no predicting when an avalanche will release. No safe zone, no reliable shelter. You simply climb and hope the mountain doesn't decide to shed its skin while you're on it. Then there's the weather. Conditions on Dhaulagiri can shift from calm to catastrophic faster than almost anywhere else in the Himalayas. A clear morning can become a deadly storm by noon. Winds exceed 100 kilometers per hour, strong enough to rip climbers off exposed ridges. Temperatures plunge below -40 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in minutes. What begins as a summit push can become a desperate fight for survival before you even realize the weather has turned. The terrain doesn't help. Dhaulagiri is a labyrinth of ice walls, unstable ridges, and deep crevasses that can swallow a climber whole. Near the summit, the air is so thin that cognitive function deteriorates rapidly. Climbers have lost their way in the final stretch, wandering aimlessly, burning through energy and oxygen until they simply collapse. Some have sat down to rest and never stood up again, their bodies frozen in place within hours. Whiteout conditions make everything worse. When clouds settle over the mountain, the world becomes an endless sheet of white. No horizon, no shadows, no way to distinguish up from down. Climbers have stepped off ridges thinking they were following safe terrain. Others have walked in circles for hours, completely disoriented, until exhaustion claimed them. And then there are the silent killers that strike from inside your own body. High-altitude pulmonary edema, known as HAPE, fills your lungs with fluid. Each breath becomes harder than the last, until you're essentially drowning in the open air. High-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, swells the brain, causing confusion, hallucinations, and eventually coma. On Everest, medical support and supplemental oxygen can buy you time. On Dhaulagiri, there's nothing. If symptoms develop, you descend immediately or you die. The isolation compounds every danger. Unlike Everest's crowded slopes, Dhaulagiri sees only a handful of climbers each season. If you run into trouble, there's a strong chance no one is coming to help. You can go days without seeing another human being. That solitude, combined with oxygen deprivation, leads to mental fatigue, poor judgment, and decisions that turn survivable situations into fatal ones. Every danger on this mountain feeds into the next, and together, they create something uniquely lethal. These dangers aren't theoretical. They've killed specific people in specific ways, and the mountain keeps a record written in frozen bodies and shattered expeditions. April 28, 1969. An American team led by Boyd Everett set out to conquer Dhaulagiri via the treacherous southeast ridge. The expedition included experienced climbers like Vin Holman, Paul Gerhard, and Bill Ross, along with several Nepali Sherpas who knew these mountains as well as anyone alive. They established a series of camps along the East Dhaulagiri Glacier, meticulously planning their route, moving supplies upward with careful precision. Everything was going according to plan. Then the mountain decided otherwise. Between camps 1 and 2, an enormous ice cliff collapsed without warning. Survivors described it as roughly the size of a football field, 20 feet deep, breaking away from the slope in a single catastrophic release. The avalanche swept down the glacier with unimaginable force. 5 climbers and 2 Sherpas vanished in seconds. 7 lives erased in a single instant. The destruction was absolute. The avalanche scoured the glacier down to bare ice, plunged over a 500-foot cliff, and came to rest far below in a twisted mass of frozen debris. Rescue efforts proved futile. The ice blocks were so massive that axes couldn't penetrate them. The few pieces of equipment recovered were completely shredded, torn apart as if they'd been fed through a machine. The bodies were never retrieved. At the time, it was one of the deadliest single incidents in Himalayan mountaineering history. Dhaulagiri had announced itself to the world. Nearly a decade later, in autumn 1978, a Japanese expedition led by Seiko Tanaka returned to the same deadly ridge. 18 climbers, months of preparation, and the same mountain waiting above. In September, an avalanche tore through the route between camps 4 and 5. Koichi Kobayashi, Yujiro Fukasawa, and Hiroshi Akazawa were killed instantly. The team made an agonizing decision. They pressed on. On October 19th and 20th, 6 climbers reached the summit in 2 separate pushes. They had done what the mountain had tried to prevent. But Dhaulagiri wasn't finished. On October 20th, climbing leader Katsuyoshi Kohara fell to his death on the exact same section where the earlier avalanche had struck. 4 dead. The summit had cost them everything. October 2001 brought a different kind of horror. 2 separate tragedies in a single month. On October 11th, Spanish climber Jose Antonio Garces fell during his summit attempt. Despite extensive searches, his body was never recovered. 3 days later, a Japanese team of 3 climbers, Hideki Nazuka, Masashi Fukumoto, and Ryuichi Hoshino, vanished on the eastern face. Coordinated rescue operations found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no trace. They simply disappeared into the ice and snow, claimed by a mountain that offers no explanations. Decade after decade, the pattern repeats. Different teams, different nationalities, different routes, the same outcome. Dhaulagiri takes who it wants, when it wants, and leaves behind only questions and grief. And in October 24, it happened again. In October 24, 5 Russian climbers arrived at Dhaulagiri's base camp with a plan that left no room for compromise. They would climb the mountain in the purest style possible. No Sherpa guides, no supplemental oxygen, no safety nets of any kind. Just 5 men, their skills, and 8,167 meters of frozen uncertainty. The team was led by Alexander Dusheko, a veteran of high-altitude expeditions who had spent years preparing for this moment. Alongside him were Oleg Kruglov, Vladimir Chistakov, Mikhail Nosenko, and Dmitry Shpilovoy. All of them were seasoned mountaineers. All of them understood the risks. They had climbed together before, trusted each other completely, and believed that their experience would carry them to the summit and back. October 6, 24. The team began their summit push under clear skies. Conditions were favorable. The weather window looked solid. They moved steadily upward, gaining altitude with the confidence of climbers who had done this many times before. Around 11 p.m., they radioed base camp from approximately 8,000 meters. Their voices were calm, optimistic. The summit was within reach. Everything was going according to plan. That was their final transmission. When the team failed to check in the following day, concern rippled through base camp. Hours passed. No signal, no movement on the slopes. By October 8th, a helicopter search operation was launched, scanning the upper mountain for any sign of the 5 climbers. What they found confirmed the worst fears imaginable. All 5 bodies were discovered at 700 meters, scattered across a treacherous traverse beneath the summit ridge. Preliminary assessments pieced together what had likely happened. The team had fallen from approximately 700 meters, probably while still roped together. A single misstep, a collapsing snow bridge. One mistake, and all 5 were pulled down in a chain reaction that no amount of skill could stop. The recovery operation became its own nightmare. High winds battered the helicopter. Temperatures made prolonged hovering nearly impossible. The sheer altitude pushed both machines and pilots to their absolute limits. It wasn't until October 16th, 10 days after the summit push began, that a specialized team using long-line techniques managed to retrieve the bodies. The climbers were flown to Kathmandu and eventually repatriated to Russia, where families received the news that 5 men who had dedicated their lives to the mountains would never come home. The tragedy reinforced a truth that Dhaulagiri has been teaching for over 60 years. Experience is not armor. Preparation is not a guarantee. The mountain doesn't care about your credentials or your commitment to pure alpinism. It simply presents conditions, and those conditions can turn fatal in an instant. One wrong step on unstable snow, one moment of lost balance on an exposed ridge, one decision that seems reasonable until it isn't. The Russian team climbed with skill, discipline, pindar, and courage. They did everything right. And Dhaulagiri took them anyway, adding 5 more names to a list that grows longer with each passing year. And yet they keep coming. Every year, despite the bodies frozen into the ice, despite the names added to the grim tally, elite alpinists return to Dhaulagiri. Not for fame, not for fortune. This mountain doesn't promise sponsorships or documentaries or overcrowded base camps. It offers something rarer, a true test, a raw, unfiltered confrontation with the limits of human endurance. For some, it's the allure of the South Face, that impossible 4,000-meter wall that has defeated every attempt. For others, it's the mountain's purity, a stark contrast to the commercialized chaos of Everest. No guided tours, no fixed ropes laid out by Sherpas, no oxygen bottles cached at every camp. On Dhaulagiri, every step is earned, every decision matters, and every mistake can be your last. Some climbers underestimate it. They arrive unprepared for the reality of terrain that shifts overnight, weather that turns lethal in minutes, and isolation so complete that rescue may never come. They don't realize how deadly it is until they're already too high to turn back. And by then, for some, it's already too late. Advancements in technology and gear have improved the odds. Forecasting is better, equipment is lighter and warmer, communication is more reliable. But Dhaulagiri remains what it has always been. A mountain that punishes overconfidence and forgives nothing. The glaciers still move, the crevasses still open, the avalanches still roar down without warning. The mountain doesn't keep score. It doesn't care how many peaks you've conquered or how many years you've dedicated to this pursuit. It simply exists, indifferent and eternal, waiting for the next team to test themselves against its slopes. Some will summit, some will turn back, and some will never return at all, their bodies joining the others frozen somewhere in the ice, claimed by a peak that offers no explanations and no apologies. Dhaulagiri, 8,167 meters of frozen silence, the 7th highest mountain on Earth, and one of the deadliest places any human being can choose to go. Would you ever attempt the climb?